We've got our basic master detail view laid out using a split view controller. In this lesson, we'll begin making some changes needed by our view controllers to handle this new containment. One of the big problems we currently have is that when we're in portrait mode, we have no way to view the master list. This means we're stuck looking at the same album details, or no details as it currently stands, without first switching to landscape. Clearly not a great user experience, so let's get that resolved. Our album details view controller needs to become the split view controller's delegate, so it can change the state of its navigation bar as we switch orientations. This will give the detail view a way to present a button that will allow a user to see the master list. We'll begin by having the album details view controller adopt this protocol called UI split view controller delegate, and this will allow us to participate in the split view controller's lifecycle events. Let me switch over to the implementation, and I'll implement a couple of its delegate methods. I'll implement the split view controller will hide view controller with bar button item for popover controller method. This has to be one of the longest method names I've ever encountered while doing Cocoa development, but it is very descriptive. I'll also implement split view controller will show view controller invalidating bar button item. When the device is being rotated into portrait mode, this top method will be invoked, and this provides us with an opportunity to put a bar button item in our navigation bar that will be used to present the master list. When the device is rotated back into landscape mode, the method on the bottom will be invoked, and we can take the opportunity to remove that bar button item from our navigation bar. Before I implement these methods, let me go up to the top of the class. I'll create a class extension so I can define a private property called master popover controller. And this will be a UI popover controller instance representing our master list. I'll scroll down and synthesize that. Alright, so I'll begin by setting the bar button item that's being passed into this method. I'll set its title, and I'll call this iMusicList. I'll then set that bar button item as my left bar button item in the navigation bar. And then finally, I'm going to store a reference to this popover controller that's being passed into this method. Then in the bottom method, when we're switching to landscape mode, I'll set the left bar button item to nil, so I can remove that from the navigation bar. And I'll also nil out the master popover controller reference, which will free up this instance. Let me run the app and see how things look. Well, that doesn't look any different than it did before. And even though we adopted this protocol and implemented the delegate methods, we haven't actually marked ourselves as the split view controller's delegate. Normally we wire up a delegate property inside of Interface Builder, but we're not able to do that in this case, and instead we'll mark ourselves as the delegate in the application delegate. And the way we'll do that is as follows. We'll first ask the window for its root view controller, which will be our split view controller on the iPad. We'll then ask the split view controller to get the last object in its view controllers array. A split view controller's view controllers property is an array containing two elements. The first element is the master list view controller, and the second is the detail view controller. And we'll type this as a UI navigation controller since our detail view controller is wrapped inside of a nav controller. Finally, we'll ask the navigation controller for its top view controller, which will be our instance of album details view controller. And we'll set that then as the split view controller's delegate. Let me run this again. And now we can see we have this iMusicList button in our navigation bar. So if I tap this, it will present the music list. If I rotate into landscape mode, we can see that disappears. Let me switch back again. So we get this nice little effect of this thing sliding over the top. There is one problem with this presentation, however. As we select these different albums, unfortunately this popover controller really obscures our album details. Now as we tap the individual rows, we could have this thing automatically slide out of the way, but unfortunately to represent that list, the user would have to tap the iMusicList button again and again. We really want to minimize the number of taps. It would be nice if we could have this iMusicList show up side by side regardless of the orientation. Let me switch back to the album details view controller. And a new method added in iOS is this delegate method called split view controller should hide view controller in orientation. And this gives us an opportunity to query that interface orientation and determine whether or not we want to hide that view controller. In our case, we can simply return no, as we want that master list to always be present. Let me save this again and run, and let's see how this looks. Well, that looks a little better. That should be a much nicer presentation. Our details view doesn't really require a whole lot of width, so we can probably squeeze everything in both orientations without much of a problem. Let's fix up one thing relating to the buttons we have at the bottom of the screen. Let me switch back to the storyboard. I'll zoom in on our detail view. I don't really like where our buttons are sitting. I guess I'd kind of like these to be roughly centered on the screen. But when we run the app like this, well, they look decent in landscape mode. They're a little off center, but we can fix that. But when we switch to portrait mode, they get truncated. Once again, that's not going to be a great user experience. So let's see what we can do to fix that. Now, we could attempt to adjust the auto-sizing behavior of these buttons, but that's probably not going to get us exactly what we want. Instead, let's just simply make sure that both of these are highlighted. Let's go up to the editor menu and say embed in view. What this will do is embed these in their own container view, and that way we can assure that they're always proportionately spaced. Let's select that view and change its background color to clear color. We really don't want it to be visible, it just should be a container for these buttons. And then let's go and switch the auto-sizing behavior of the container view by taking these two outer struts off. What this will do is effectively allow that container to float in the middle of the screen. We'll center this horizontally in the container, and let's run it again. So now as we toggle back and forth, those buttons look much better and always float in the center of the screen. Very cool. We now have the split view layout behavior we want. In this lesson, we saw how to become the split view controller's delegate so we can change our UI based on the current orientation, and saw how to leverage a great new iOS feature to provide a better user experience for our app.